Hello everybody, I'm Miss Lisa, and welcome back to another episode of Watercolor for Kids. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a mountain range, and we're going to look at how you can use color to help you get the illusion that you've got short sort of foothills in the foreground, but then as you move back, your mountains are getting taller and further away. So we can use color to help us get that effect, and that's what I want to show you today with the watercolor class. And as we get into this a little bit more, we'll talk about trees. We'll see if we have time today. If we don't, we'll do that next week. We'll talk about how to paint beautiful trees. So let's get started here. On my piece of watercolor paper, I'm going to make a border, because I know this is a painting, so I want to keep my painting on the paper, and it's a lot easier if I start out with a border. And it also makes a beautiful white frame for my painting, so that when I'm done, my painting is automatically framed. So I put a dot about 1/2 inch from each corner, and then I just connect those dots. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not using a ruler. And I think I've mentioned this before. If you have trouble connecting these dots, and they certainly don't have to be perfectly connected, but if you have trouble doing this, you might want to turn your paper on the diagonal like I'm doing right now. Somehow it's much easier for me to draw these lines if my paper is at a diagonal and not completely vertical or not completely horizontal. So now I have my border, and I'm going to start by drawing a zigzag line that's going to represent the mountaintops furthest away from me. And I'm going to make sure that my line is not just zigzag, zigzag. I want it to look somewhat natural. So I'm thinking about what the shapes of distant mountaintops might look like. And of course, yours doesn't have to look like mine. I'm not looking at any mountains, but I think if I saw this mountaintop, these mountains, I would want to go visit them. They look interesting. Now I'm going to do another row of mountains that are going to be a bit closer. And again, I'm going to draw them with kind of a zigzag line, but I want that line to look different than this one. So where this one comes down, maybe this one will go up. I want it to look somewhat random, like natural variation. Maybe this one goes down for a while and then comes up again. Maybe there's a nice valley here. Okay, and then I'm going to make another one that's slightly closer. Maybe this one starts down, continues down for a while, and then goes up. And then these are the foothills. I'm going to make them slightly rounder, not so sharp, and not so much variation in the height. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put some paint on this. And remember when I showed you how to draw and paint when we did the leaf rubbings? If you get too close to your background color, or you get your background color too close to the leaf color and you make those little bridges of the wet paint, the colors run between the two areas, right? And I want my sky to be blue, and I want my very distant mountaintops to be a very light gray blue. And so I don't want this to get mixed in with my sky blue. I'm going to start with the mountain, and I'm going to paint right up to that line, and then I'm just going to let it dry a bit. And when I come back and paint the blue for the sky, I'm not going to go all the way down to this line. I'll leave a little bit of white in between, and that way the mountaintop and the sky will not mix together. So I'm going to start by getting my brush wet, and I've got some blue there. I'm going to put a little bit of gray. I'm going to put some black into it to make it into a gray color. Should have a nice bluey gray color. And I'm going to get my brush wet and just pull some of that over here and dilute it with water. I'm going to get a tiny bit more blue for that. So this color is going to go right up to the line. I'm going to work fairly quickly so that I can keep the paint moving, because remember that water is what makes your paint move when you do watercolors. That makes sense, right? So you want to take advantage of water to help you do the painting. And that's partly the reason why I have a larger brush. If you want to get serious about watercolor, you might want to buy a slightly bigger brush, or find one to use, because if you have the ability to move your paint faster, you'll find that you can do more things with your paints. Okay, so that is my furthest set of mountains. Now I'm going to paint another one here, and I'm going to be really careful because I can see some places where that paint's going to run, so maybe I won't go all the way up. I won't go all the way up to the line right here. And I'm going to make this one a little bit bluer and just a tiny bit darker. I'll get some more blue into this. Now when we paint, we're actually setting up an illusion. We're making things appear to be as we want them to, but in reality it might not be that way. So I'm painting some mountains that appear to be blue. They're not actually blue, are they? If you were walking on this mountain here, it would not actually be blue. But if you look at mountains in the distance, they do appear to be blue if you see them far away. The next time you look at very distant mountains, and think about what color you see. Sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're kind of lavender. And when you get up close, then you can see the browns and the greens. Now I'm leaving a little bit of white here because oftentimes when you have rows of mountains, there's some mist, or at least haze, that settles there. And that is useful because then we don't have to paint our color right down to the line. And that helps us preserve the distinct mountaintops, because we are going to get our layers mixing if we get too close to the layer that we just painted. So now I've got blue and I've got blue-gray. And now I'm going to come out here and I'm going to make a row that is slightly brown. So it's going to be sort of a brown blue. So I'm going to take my brown and mix that in. And that's quite a dark color, so I'm going to add some water. As you get closer to the viewer, the colors will appear darker. I still need a bit of blue in that. I don't feel like we're close enough to have that color yet. So I put a little bit more blue in it. You get this kind of beautiful olive green. And we'll go with that. And you can imagine that maybe you can see some trees. Well, not individual trees, but you might see areas on these mountains where you can pick out some clumps of trees. See, doesn't it look like this mountain is now in front of these two? And you can imagine that maybe there's some forest here. The colors kind of make you think of forest. I'm just going to go along the edge here with my wet brush and encourage some of that color to go down near the line in front of it, but not touch it. And then my closest area here, the foothills, I can put a little bit of green in it. I'm going to go with mostly brown and then put some green in. And anywhere that I got close to this line, I'm just going to dip down so that I don't touch it and I don't get my colors mixing. Because I want to have distinct layers of mountains here. And we know what's going to happen if I accidentally touch. That line. I'm going to make a little water bridge and the colors are going to mix. So when I get to the edge here, I want to be carefully keeping my color inside the border, and it makes just this beautiful frame. Okay, so now we've got, put some brown in here, and I'm going to go into a little bit of, I'm going to pick some more brown actually. And now I'm going to go into the green, pick up a little bit of green. I'm just going to put some of that green in the brown, and I'm going to mix it right on my paper. So you have to have enough water on your paper that the colors will mix naturally. And I can bring this right down to my border if I want to. It's going to kind of look like forests on the hillside of the closest set of hills. These are the foothills. And I can just use my brush to kind of encourage the green and the brown to move into each other slightly. I can also pick up a little bit more green and add that here and there, kind of give it the feeling that there are groups of distant trees in there. I can just let it mix naturally. And I'm not going to mess around with this too much. Sometimes you just have to let it dry and let it do its thing and then let it dry. And it'll look pretty cool. So there's our mountains, our foothills, and 3 layers of mountaintops. Now we're going to do the sky. And to do the sky, I'm just going to turn my landscape upside down, and I'm going to use some blue along this ridge here. And the paper's still a little bit damp, so I don't want to get my blue close to the line, but I don't want to get too close to it anyway because I want to leave some cloud. I'm going to put some cloud between the sky and the mountaintops, and that way that'll really keep the sky, the sky blue away from making any water bridge that's going to mix into the mountains. And I'm also going to be thinking about some clouds. I'm first going to get some blue and a lot of water. And I'll start down here. And I'll just kind of paint some cloud shapes as I go. Now I can take a tissue and kind of blot the edges to soften them, because clouds are soft, right? We don't want to have hard edges on our clouds. Well, sometimes they have hard edges, but mostly they're soft edges. But I'm not going to blot anything off of my mountaintops. I'll just leave those as they are. And there we have our first landscape, which is finished. And I have some time to talk about trees, and I love to talk about trees, because if we're going to be doing landscapes, we need to talk about trees. So we'll just move this piece over. I encourage you to get a sketchbook and to be doing drawings of trees. Trees are, especially in groups, they're very interesting. They look like they have personalities to me. They look like they're standing in a group and they're talking about something, or sometimes they look like they're dancing, especially if it's windy. Sometimes they look like they're just having a little chat. But what they're not usually doing is standing straight up and down with a ball of leaves on top. Okay, that's sort of our cartoon tree that we have in our minds. And we really have to look at trees and say, what does that tree really look like? Is the trunk straight? Does it curve? Is the main line a diagonal, or is it vertical? And then you can start to think about how you can draw your tree to make it look somewhat realistic. And when you can draw a tree realistically, then they become very fun to put in a landscape, because you can have your trees really look like they're enjoying themselves, or you can use them to draw attention to a certain area of your painting. So let's think about trees for a minute. First thing I want to say about trees is that trees are very individual. Okay, they are not all the same. And just like leaves are very individual, right? Sometimes they look similar, but if you really look at a leaf and look at another leaf, you'll see all sorts of variation from leaf to leaf. Same thing with trees. So in our minds, we're thinking about a ball of leaves, and we're thinking about a straight trunk. And sometimes the ball of leaves might actually be more of a triangle of leaves. But what we want to think about is, where can we see the sky? Okay, first of all, what's the general shape of the tree? So if we're thinking about a tree that looks like a ball, we're saying that the general shape of the tree is a sphere, and then it has the trunk. If the tree looks like a triangle, then we're saying it's more like a cone, right? A three-dimensional triangle would be a cone shape. So the tree might be a cone shape, with a trunk. So we can get that far, but then we have to make them look like individuals. And one way to make them look like individuals is to look for the areas where you can see through the trees. And some people call those sky holes. So if you look for sky holes, suddenly you see something a little bit different. Each tree has a different set of sky holes. And those are really important because they make your painting look real. You know, if you can paint a tree that has both leaves and sky holes, it looks more natural than if you just had a solid bunch of green. There are very few trees that actually have solid bunches of green. So let's try to make a tree. And let's start with the leaves. Okay, I'm going to take some green. And I'm thinking about what color do I want these leaves. That does not, I mean, in spring that might be natural, but leaves tend to be a little bit darker. I'm going to put a little bit of red in there to see how it makes it more into a natural color. And I'm going to think about how I want my tree to be standing. What kind of tree is this? I'm going to start by putting my paintbrush in this direction, and I can make it point. Make it pointed. And then if I turn my brush this way, I can do this. And I can start making something that looks like a fir tree. So I'm thinking this one's going to be more like a cone, right? That Christmas tree shape. The trees in the forest. So that's how we get that shape of tree. And then I'll let that dry a little bit and I'll go back and put a little bit more color in it. But let's try a different shape of tree. So I'm going to take some green. A little bit of red. And see, if I put too much red into it, now it doesn't look like green anymore. But that's okay, because now we can go back to the green. Pick up some more green and put that in there. And now we get that lovely dark green color. Okay, now I'm going to make a tree that has lots of sky holes. And this tree is going to be somewhat rounded in shape. So I'm going to be using the side of my brush a lot when I do this because I just want to make blobs of leaves. I'll start with just blobs of leaves, kind of random. But I'm thinking about the general shape of a sphere. And I'll stop there for now. I'm going to go back to this guy now, and I'm going to put some darker colors around the bottom there, because it's going to be lighter up on top where the light's hitting it, and it'll be darker down here where it has some shadow, right? There's some shadow where the upper branches will be casting a shadow, usually on the lower branches, somewhat. And so we need some darker colors down here. So I'm going to go back into my green. I'm going to pick up a fair amount of green. And a fair amount of red. Don't be afraid to use your palette lid. This is meant for mixing colors, and you can just wipe it clean afterwards. Don't wait till it dries. Just when you're done with your painting session, you can wipe it clean. Okay, now I'm going to put, look at that color, isn't that beautiful? I'm going to put some of this color down here at the base of my tree. I'm also going to use it for some shadow colors inside the branches there. So I'll put some of this in here. And I'm looking for some variety, so I've got a little bit more of a reddy green here and a bit more of a dark green here. And I'm not going to go too far up my tree because that's going to be a little bit lighter. I can even put a little bit of blue in there for the really shaded bits to add some more variation. Let's just add a little bit of blue in there too. And the paper's wet, and at this point, this is a good place to actually just let the painting paint itself. So I don't mind if these colors mix now. I didn't want my sky mixing in with my mountaintops, but I don't mind if the shadows mix in with the branches. And there's not going to be much of a trunk showing, but I can just put an indication that there's a trunk here. And I can dilute this paint and just put a little bit of soil, dirt underneath the pine, maybe they're pine branches and pine needles. I can put some color under the tree. Now this tree, because it's a different sort of tree, is going to be one with lots of different kind of branches sticking out. And we want to make sure that we can see some of those branches because we've got sky holes. So let me go ahead and just put some of the sky in next so we can see what we're doing. So for that we'll need some blue and some water. I want to make it thin. I'm going to put some blue up here. I put some blue in some of these holes. I know it looks a bit crazy right now because there's no branches showing, but we'll fix that. And if you paint the sky in first and let the paper dry, then you can do this green bit on top of it. And you don't have to go ahead and paint all around these bunches of leaves, these leaf clumps. Okay, so here we go. We've got some leaf clumps and we've got the sky. And I know that if I put my trunk color in there, it's going to run because the blue is wet. So I'm going to leave the blue for a minute and I'm going to go back and put a little bit more detail into the leaves. And one thing I want to do is maybe make some, we've got some darker green on this one. Maybe I'll make some lighter green for this tree. I'm going to give it some spring leaves. So I know I'm going to be using some yellow. I'm just going to mix it into some of this color here. What will happen if we do that? Normally I would just mix it with the green in the palette, but this will give us some variation as well. You can see that green, you can see the yellow showing through. I don't want to paint over everything that I just painted with the other green color, just a little bit to make it look like we've got some bits that are catching the light and some bits that are not. And then let's just go ahead and see now if we can get some of the branches and trunk painted on without everything mixing together. So I want to make my brown not so drippy. No drippy paint here because if I put drippy paint down on this that isn't completely dry, it's going to go all over the place. So my brown is fairly dry. I haven't used a lot of water into it. I haven't mixed a lot of water into it. So let's see if we can get away with not letting the blue dry completely. I'm going to pull down some branches here and a trunk. And maybe some roots. Let's give it some character. See how that really makes the tree look characterful, just putting some different shapes in the roots and the trunk. And now we're going to add some branches. Now I'm not pushing down. If I push down on my brush, I'll get a fat line, but if I pull up and just barely touch the bristles to the paper, I'll get a fine line. It's kind of like putting pressure on your pencil. If you push down hard, you're going to get a dark line, but if you don't press down hard, you can make a light line. But here, if I press down hard, I'm going to get a fat line, and if I pull up and just use the tip of my brush, I can get a thin line. And that's good to try too, because it's useful to be able to make different kinds of lines when you paint. Now, the lines, the branches, can go through these areas that have the sky holes, right? Because you can often see branches going in areas where there's sky underneath, or sky behind. Say the sky behind. So I can just bring out some more of these branches like this. And I'm not drawing the whole branch because some of that branch will be covered by the leaves, but just enough to make it look like it's a tree with branches. And then I can add a little bit more texture into the trunk. I can do that by either adding more brown paint like I just did, or I can even use a little bit of black in there to give it a little character. And I'll just let some of that mix on its own. And maybe I'll put some grass below. And I don't mind if some of my brown mixes into this because it will make it not so green, more natural color. And one thing, I don't know if it'll work, but I'm going to try. One thing you can do is use the back of your brush to kind of pull through the paint before it dries, and you can kind of I'm going to make some little some grass. I'm just going to dry my brush so I don't drip green paint everywhere. And with the back of my brush, I can pull through the green paint. I can pull through some of the brown there. And do you see how what's happening is it's actually, as I push through, it's damaging the paper slightly. It's called bruising, I believe. And it allows it's basically making a very small channel in the paper, a little crevice. And the paint then pools in those areas. And it's pretty cool because it's an easy way to make very thin lines just by using the back of your paintbrush. Don't press too hard because you'll rip your paper. But if you very gently but firmly go through the painted areas, and look, then you can go outside the painted areas, and some of the paint that you've got on your brush will transfer to the paper and make more grass. So that's kind of a fun thing to try. What I think you should do this week, if you get a chance, and if you have a set of watercolor paints like this, is to get some paper and first try to draw trees. Try to make each tree that you draw look different. Think, what about this tree that makes it unique? Is it the way the trunk looks? Is it the texture of the bark? Is it the shape of the clumps of leaves? Is it the color? Is it the fact that it's got a big hole in the trunk and probably an animal lives in there? Is it because the shape of the sky holes is very unique? So think about what it is about a certain tree that really catches your eye. Think about how you can draw that tree to make it look individual. What is it about that tree that really draws you to that tree? And then after you get a drawing or two, go ahead and try to mix some paints. Mix your greens, make a natural green by taking that really bright green in your paint box and adding a little bit of red to it, or maybe a little bit of brown. Think back to the class where we were painting the crayon rubbed, we were doing the leaf rubbings. So think back to that class and think about all the variations of green that we made. And then try to use some of those greens while painting your trees. And see if you can use your paintbrush at different angles. Remember this one, I started by putting my paintbrush this way to get the nice spiky tip. And then I turned it this way and did more of my tree with my paintbrush like this. And for this one, I just made little blobs as I went, making sure that I kept some sky wall showing. And then after that dries a bit and we put the sky in, I was able at that point to do the trunk and the branches. I suggest that you do the leaves first, or the blobs of leaves, because if you put your trunk in first, you might find that your leaves aren't quite where you wanted them. So if you put the leaves in first, you can always put the trunk kind of halfway along the bottom of the leaf area to get a nice balanced tree. You know, if your trunk was over here, it'd be leaning way over. So anyways, there are some things to think about for next week. Go ahead and play with some ideas about trees and colors of green. And let me just review this one for you too. We did this one where I showed you how to make a mountain range that looks like it's got very high distant mountains by using a very light, so this is done with perspective, but also with color. So remember when we did in forward and behind, the things that were in front, if we make those, give those, well, we did it in black and white when we drew them, but if we did that in color, the ones closest to us, we could make them more vibrant in color, and the ones further away, we could slightly gray the color of the apples. But in this case, the mountains are far away, so we made it a bluey gray color and really diluted that paint. And then the next ridge is going to be blue. The next ridge is going to be a little bit green now. It's getting close enough that we can see a little bit of brown and some green. So we put some brown down and we mixed some green right into it. And then this one, we put, in fact, I think we put, this was actually some gray in here too. I think it was gray and green and brown. And then here we'd have just the brown and the green because this is closest to us. And we could actually put some green into the hillside here so that it looks like we have groups of trees as well. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that. I think you have some things to work with until next week. So I hope you enjoyed that. Practice your art. Have some fun with your drawings. And take care. Wash your hands. Socially distance. Wear your mask when you're outside. Take care. Goodbye.